The coffee cup shattered on marble the same day Verity Marlowe's career did. She stood in the center of her own gallery opening, the sustainable housing exhibition that Architectural Digest had called revolutionary, and watched Brant Cavendish, her husband, calmly explain to assembled investors why everything was her fault. The cost overruns, the mismanaged budgets, the spectacular failure that wasn't a failure until he'd made it one. His voice was silk over steel. Verity's brilliant with design, but business was never her strength. He adjusted platinum cufflinks worth more than her current rent. I tried to help, but 2 years earlier, she'd been the youngest architect to win the AIA Innovation Award. She'd invented modular flood-resistant housing that generated its own power. MIT had offered her a teaching position. Her TED Talk had 19 million views. Then she'd married Brant. Now she watched him perform grief over her incompetence to people whose money he'd systematically diverted into accounts she'd never authorized. Her company, built on her patents, was being gutted. Her name was already disappearing from the website. Verity didn't defend herself, didn't shout the truth. She turned and walked out, leaving behind her reputation, her life's work, and a man who'd mistaken her silence for surrender. What she didn't know, 60 blocks north, an elderly man in worn corduroys was dying in a hospital room. On the nightstand beside him sat a will he'd revised 3 weeks earlier. On line 14, he'd written a name. A woman he'd known 6 months. A barista who talked to him about beauty and meaning when everyone else only talked about money. His name was Sebastian Wainwright. His fortune was $9.7 billion. And he just left it all to someone who thought he was a retired librarian named Mr. Sebastian. Verity's hands shook as she unlocked the apartment door. 4th floor walk-up in Brooklyn, 3 roommates. Bathroom shared with strangers. She owned 2 suitcases and a drawer full of pencils she couldn't afford to use. She'd left Brant 2 weeks ago, left the penthouse, the company, everything. Her lawyer said she had grounds to fight. She said no. Something in her gut said waiting was smarter than fighting, though she couldn't explain why. The coffee shop job started the next Monday. Café Reverie sat between a bodega and a bookshop, the kind of place that survived on regulars. Verity worked mornings, 6 to noon, making lattes for Columbia students and retirees who lingered over crosswords. Mr. Sebastian was one of the lingerers. He appeared on her 3rd day, elderly, maybe 75, in corduroys that had seen better decades and a cardigan with leather elbow patches. Wire-rimmed glasses, careful, economical movements. He ordered Earl Grey, no milk, and sat by the window with a worn copy of Ruskin's The Stones of Venice. "You've read Ruskin?" he asked when Verity delivered his tea. She shouldn't have engaged. She was supposed to be invisible now, unmemorable, but the book had been her Bible in architecture school. "The Lamp of Beauty chapter changed my life," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes, sharp gray assessing, fixed on her. "How so?" "It taught me that buildings should have souls, that beauty isn't decoration, it's structural necessity." She caught herself. "Sorry, you probably want to read in peace." "I want to hear more," he said simply, "if you have time." She didn't. The morning rush was building, but something about his complete attention made her pause. "Beauty in architecture isn't about aesthetics," she said quickly. "It's about creating spaces that remind people they're human, that they deserve dignity and light and air." Ruskin understood that ornamentation was really about reverence. "You're an architect." Was the word slipped out? "I mean, technically yes, but not practicing." "Why not?" The question was gentle but direct. Verity felt something crack inside her chest. "Long story, I should." She gestured toward the counter where customers were accumulating. "Tomorrow then," Mr. Sebastian said. "I'll be here at 10. He was. For 6 weeks, every weekday at 10 a.m., Sebastian Wainwright sat by the window and talked to a barista who didn't know she was speaking to one of the most powerful real estate developers in North America. The man who'd built half of Manhattan's skyline, who'd started with nothing in Glasgow and built an empire through precision and vision. They discussed Ruskin, then piano, then the ethics of gentrification. She sketched building systems on napkins, her regenerative designs, her water reclamation ideas, her modular housing that could adapt to climate change. He listened with the intensity of someone memorizing scripture. "If you had unlimited resources," he asked one morning in late April, "what would you build?" Verity didn't hesitate. Sanctuaries, housing for people displaced by climate disasters, beautiful, dignified, affordable. Places that generate their own power and water that can be deployed anywhere. Not refugee camps, homes. Real homes that prove poverty doesn't require ugliness and crisis doesn't require dehumanization. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Then, why sanctuaries? Because I lived in a beautiful prison for 3 years, she said quietly. I understand now that the inverse is possible, humble spaces that set you free. The next day he didn't come. Verity waited, watching the door. The day after, nothing. A week passed, 2 weeks. She asked the shop owner if anyone knew Mr. Sebastian's last name, where he lived. No one knew anything. She grieved him like a lost friend, never knowing she'd just passed the most important interview of her life. In a hospital room at Mount Sinai, Sebastian Wainwright was dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 18 months ago. He'd told no one, continued his routine, watched his company's board jockey for position like vultures circling carrion. His children, estranged for decades after his wife's death, had sent lawyers, not calls. He'd built monuments to commerce, glass towers that bore his name, developments that reshaped cities. He'd been on the Forbes 400 for 30 years. None of it mattered now, except one conversation, one barista who'd looked at his worn cardigan and seen a person, not a portfolio. Who'd talked about buildings having souls while making minimum wage. Who'd sketched impossible beauty on paper napkins and asked for nothing. Octavia, he said to his attorney, voice weak but clear, amend the will. Everything goes to Verity Marlowe. He spelled it, provided the cafe address, not the foundations, not the endowments, her. Octavia Stern, who'd worked for Sebastian 20 years, didn't blink. May I ask why? She saw me as human, Sebastian said simply. That's worth more than any institution I could endow, and she has the vision to use it right. She'll build the sanctuaries I should have built decades ago. He died 6 days later. Octavia filed the death certificate and began probate. The will was ironclad. Sebastian had made certain of it. No family could contest. The fortune would transfer cleanly. Then Octavia discovered something. Verity Marlowe was in the middle of a divorce. She pulled court records, saw the husband's name attached to a company Verity had founded, saw the divorce filing, the asset claims, the legal maneuvering of a man trying to strip his wife of everything. Octavia did the math. If she notified Verity before the divorce finalized, Brant Cavendish could argue the inheritance was marital property. He could tie it up in litigation for years. Sebastian's gift would become a weapon. So Octavia waited, watched the court docket, set a calendar reminder for 5 days after the divorce finalized. The inheritance was certified. The letter was written. The courier was scheduled. All that remained was timing. Brant Cavendish filed for divorce on September 3rd. His lawyers were efficient. He claimed Verity had abandoned marital assets, demanded she return company property, wanted her name removed from every patent, every project, every trace of her existence. His attorney called it cutting dead weight. Verity didn't fight. Her public defender begged her to reconsider. Marcus, her former business partner, called her crazy. Even the judge seemed confused by her passivity. But something in Verity's bones said, let him win. Let him think he's won. She didn't know why. Grief, maybe, exhaustion. Or some instinct deeper than thought. The court date was set for October 12th. On October 9th, Octavia Stern confirmed the inheritance had cleared all legal challenges. She drafted a letter in Sebastian's words. He'd written it before he died, sealed it, marked it for Verity Marlowe when the time is right. On October 12th, Verity stood in court and accepted terms that gave her nothing. She walked out into October rain with empty hands and inexplicable calm. On October 17th, exactly 5 days later, a courier knocked on her Brooklyn apartment door. Verity signed for the envelope, heavy paper. Law firm letterhead, Stern and Associates. She almost threw it away, assuming it was more divorce paperwork. Then she saw the name written in fountain pen across the seal, Sebastian Wainwright. Her hands went numb. She tore it open. A letter fell out, along with legal documents she couldn't process. The letter was in handwriting she'd never seen but somehow recognized, careful, architectural, the script of someone who thought before writing. Dear Verity, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I should have told you the truth, but I was selfish. Those mornings at Cafe Reverie were the first honest conversations I'd had in decades. If you'd known I was Sebastian Wainwright, the name, the money, the reputation, you would have treated me differently. Everyone does. You talked to me about beauty as necessity, about buildings with souls. You sketched sanctuaries on napkins and asked for nothing. You saw me as human. That's a gift I can't repay, only pay forward. I've left you everything, not the company I sold that years ago, but the fortune it generated. $9.7 billion, give or take. The lawyers will explain the details. I don't expect gratitude. I expect you to build those sanctuaries you described, to prove that architecture can be both beautiful and kind. To create the world you sketched on those napkins. You asked me once why I read Ruskin every morning, because he understood that beauty is not a luxury, it's a human right. You understand that too, that's why this fortune is yours now. Build something worthy of the vision you shared with a lonely old man in a coffee shop. Build something that proves kindness isn't weakness, with respect and hope. Sebastian, Verity sat on the floor of her apartment, read the letter 3 times. Then the legal documents, then the letter again. $9.7 billion. Sebastian Wainwright, the Sebastian Wainwright who'd built half of Manhattan, had been Mr. Sebastian. The elderly man in worn corduroys who'd listened to her ramble about regenerative design, who'd asked thoughtful questions, who'd disappeared, who'd been dying. She cried then for the friend she'd lost, for the loneliness in his letter, for the staggering weight of his trust. Her phone rang, unknown number. Ms. Marlowe, this is Octavia Stern. I assume you've received the letter. Yes, this can't be real. It's very real. Mr. Wainwright was precise in his wishes. The fortune is yours, no conditions. Well, one condition, he wanted you to use it, but that's trust, not legal obligation. Why me? His letter explains it better than I could. But for what it's worth, in 20 years of working for Sebastian Wainwright, I never saw him smile the way he did after your conversations. You gave him something money couldn't buy. Verity's mind was spinning. The divorce. It finalized 5 days ago. I know, Octavia said carefully. I waited. You waited. Mr. Wainwright died 2 months ago. The inheritance cleared probate 6 weeks ago. I could have contacted you immediately. Pause. But I also saw your divorce filing. If I'd notified you before the marriage dissolved, your ex-husband could have claimed marital property rights. So I waited, watched the court docket, and scheduled this courier for 5 days after the finalization, when the legal window closed. Verity's breath caught. The timing wasn't luck, it was strategy. Sebastian had protected her even in death through an attorney who understood exactly what Brant would do. Ms. Marlowe, are you there? I didn't fight in court, Verity whispered. Everyone thought I was giving up, but something told me to just let it happen, let him win. Instinct is remarkable, Octavia said quietly. If you'd fought, delayed the proceedings, extended the litigation, your ex-husband would have discovered this inheritance while still legally your spouse. As it stands, he has no claim whatsoever. The divorce was final before you had any assets to divide. I need to sit down. You're already sitting, I assume. Ms. Marlowe, take the weekend to process this. Monday, we'll discuss the transfer of funds, the structure of the holdings, and the foundation, Mr. Wainwright suggested you establish. He had some thoughts on that. After Octavia hung up, Verity sat in her apartment until sunset. Then she pulled out her old drafting pencils and began to sketch. Sanctuaries. Just like she'd described, just like she'd promised. The news broke on Monday. Billionaire Sebastian Wainwright leaves entire fortune to unknown architect, screamed the Times headline. Within hours, every business journal had picked up the story. By evening, it was national news. Brant saw it on his phone during a meeting. He read the headline twice, then the article, then Verity's name confirmed, spelled correctly. Then the amount, $9.7 billion, his vision grayed at the edges. Verity, his ex-wife. The woman he'd spent 3 years systematically destroying. The woman who'd signed away everything 5 days ago. The woman he'd called incompetent, unstable, incapable. She was now one of the richest women in America, and the divorce was final, irrevocably, permanently final. His attorney called within minutes. Tell me this is a different Verity Marlowe. It's her, Brant said, voice hollow. When did she receive this inheritance? I don't know, after the divorce, has to be after. If it was before, it wasn't. Brant pulled up the article again. Notification occurred October 17th. Our divorce finalized October 12th. 5-day gap. His attorney was quiet. Then that's a very specific gap. What are you saying? I'm saying someone with good lawyers made sure she received this information after she was legally untethered from you. Which means there's nothing, absolutely nothing we can do. Brant's office walls seemed to tilt. 3 years. He'd spent 3 years absorbing her company, her patents, her reputation. He'd stripped her down to nothing deliberately, systematically. Let her walk away with empty hands if he'd known, if he'd even suspected. He could have delayed the divorce, discovered the inheritance, claimed half, but he'd been so certain she was worthless. So convinced she had nothing left, the irony was acid in his throat. By winning completely, he'd lost everything. His phone lit up with texts, friends, colleagues, people who'd witnessed the divorce, who'd heard him call her unstable, who'd watched him erase her name from the company. Everyone was asking the same question. Did you know? He hadn't known. He'd been blind, and now the whole world would watch him choke on that blindness. 3 days later, Brant appeared at Octavia Stern's office, demanded to see Verity, was told Ms. Marlowe wasn't available. I need to speak with her, he said, trying charm first. There's been a misunderstanding about the company assets. There has been no misunderstanding, Octavia said, voice pleasant and sharp as a scalpel. Marlowe signed away her claims to Cavendish Innovations. That agreement stands. This inheritance is separate property acquired after dissolution of marriage. You have no claim, legal or otherwise. I built that company. Ms. Marlowe built that company. You acquired it through systematic manipulation documented in email records we've now subpoenaed for an intellectual property review. I'd advise you to stop talking. Brant's mask cracked. Just let me see her, 5 minutes. No, please, the word cost him. I need to explain. Explain what? That you systematically destroyed your wife's career, that you diverted company funds, that you committed fraud that's now under investigation by 3 regulatory agencies? Octavia's smile was cold. Ms. Marlowe doesn't need your explanations. She's busy building something worthy of her talents. Something you never understood she had. Verity appeared in the doorway then. Brant almost didn't recognize her. She wore a simple dress, charcoal gray, elegant, and her hair was pulled back the way she used to wear it before he'd convinced her it looked too severe. She looked directly at him with eyes that held no anger, no triumph, just distance. Brant, she said quietly, you should go. Verity, please, we can work something out. The patents you developed, you deserve credit. I'm filing to have my name restored to those patents, she said. Not for money, for accuracy. I designed those systems. History should reflect that. That's fair, that's completely fair. Maybe we could discuss. No, the word was gentle but absolute. There's nothing to discuss. You wanted me erased, you got what you wanted. Now I'm building something new and you're not part of it. I made mistakes, Brant said, and he meant it, or meant that he meant it. But we were partners once. We could be again. Think what we could do with your resources. We were never partners, Verity said. I was an asset you acquired and depreciated. But that's done now. I hope you find whatever you were looking for. It wasn't with me. She turned to leave. You knew, Brant said suddenly. In court, you knew about this inheritance. That's why you didn't fight. Verity paused, looked back. I didn't know, I promise you I had no idea, but something told me to let you win, to let you have everything you wanted, and I'm glad I listened. How is that possible? I don't know, she said honestly. Instinct, luck, maybe Sebastian was looking out for me somehow, but it doesn't matter anymore. Goodbye, Brant. She walked out. Brant stood in the office, staring at the door, understanding for the first time what he'd actually lost. Not money, not property. The woman who'd sketched impossible beauty on napkins and asked for nothing. The architect who understood that buildings should have souls. The person who'd loved him before he'd systematically taught her not to. That loss was permanent, and no lawyer could undo it. 6 months later, Verity stood in front of a completed building in Houston's 3rd Ward. The Wainwright Sanctuary, the first of 12 planned locations, rose 3 stories in modular sections that seemed to breathe. Solar panels formed a living roof. Rainwater collection systems fed into community gardens. Every unit was 450 square feet of affordable, beautiful, dignified housing for families displaced by hurricane season flooding. The architecture critic from the Times called it a revolution in disaster housing, proof that crisis doesn't require ugliness. Verity walked through the community space where children did homework under natural light, and residents gathered for meals cooked in a commercial kitchen designed for dignity, not efficiency. The walls displayed artwork from the families who lived there. The courtyard had trees and benches and room to breathe. An elderly woman stopped her. "You the architect?" "Yes," Verity said. "My granddaughter, she draws buildings now. Because of this place, she says she wants to make homes that love people back." The woman's eyes were bright. "I never lived anywhere that loved me back before." Verity thought of Sebastian then, of his letter, of his trust that she'd use his fortune to build sanctuaries, not monuments. "That's the whole point," she said softly. "Architecture should love people back." That evening, she returned to her office, not a penthouse now, but a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn with drafting tables and a team of young architects who shared her vision. On her desk was the photograph she'd found in Sebastian's files, him at 30 in Glasgow standing in front of the first building he'd ever designed. Before the empire, before the money, she'd framed it, kept it where she could see it. "I'm building them," she said to the photograph, "the sanctuaries just like I promised. 12 locations in the first year, then 20, then 50, housing that generated its own power, communities that reclaimed dignity. Architecture that proved beauty wasn't luxury, it was necessity." The foundation bore Sebastian's name. The buildings bore no name at all, just addresses and open doors. And Verity Marlowe, formerly erased, formerly defeated, formerly nothing, became the architect who taught the world that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was creation. The story of how silence became strategy, how loss became gain, how a coffee shop conversation became a billion-dollar legacy. That story spread like wildfire. It was shared, retold, adapted. Because everyone understood what it proved, that authentic worth will always be recognized even if it takes time. That strategic silence is more powerful than reactive defense. That kindness isn't weakness, it's the most sophisticated form of strength. And that sometimes losing everything is exactly how you find out what you're really worth. Sebastian Wainwright had built monuments to commerce. Verity Marlowe built monuments to humanity. One left a fortune, the other left a legacy. In the end, only one of those things mattered.